It's my great pleasure to introduce Sheri Glucoft Wong to La Scuola. She's worked with us for many, many years, and she's a partner for us, and we're so delighted to have her here. Welcome to tonight.
Thank you. And it's such a pleasure to be with La Scuola parents. I love this school. It is so sweet. And I feel the same way you do, Valentina, that actually not only does this school value children, but they value parents. And that isn't something you see everywhere. That this is a school that really, really cares about partnering with parents, collaborating with parents. It's a family school. A family attends this school, not just the kids. And that's so important and so near and dear to my heart. Also, what Valentina said about all of the years and launching a kid, you know, there's a saying about raising kids: long days, short years. And it's so true. Like, the days can drag on till bedtime, but the years go by so quickly before you know it. So I'm going to talk about parenting tonight with an eye not just on your daily life with children, which is a big part of what I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to talk about your daily life about children, with your daily life with children, because everyday time at home in the family with parents is probably the most influential aspect of a kid's development on every single front. And so how things happen at home, how your interactions are, what the expectations are, how things are managed when they go off, what is working well when they're going right, all of these things color and shape your kid's sense of themselves, of their resilience, of their confidence, of their social selves, and believe it or not, also of their academic selves. So actually, their kids' relationship with parents is the single most influential factor in who they come to be and their social emotional well-being. So lots of parents think about home life as kind of a refuge from the world out there. Like, wow, at school, they have to wait their turn. At home, we should just let them have their turn when they want it. At school, they have to stand in line or have everything structured. Maybe at home, we just let all that go. But home is a refuge from the hard stuff that happens for kids out there, but it's also a place where you want to prepare them for how to manage in the world out there. So you don't want it to be the opposite or the non-world. You want it to be the world. And as a matter of fact, I am fond of saying that home is a training ground for how the world works. And the reason for that is, I'll tell you a secret that I love to tell parents when I meet with them, which is that kids actually think their parents are rational. Your children are walking around imagining that everything you do on purpose, you do it deliberately, it's the way it's supposed to be. So if you run home life in a way that isn't quite so rational, your kid doesn't know that. And they end up having the same expectations out in the world. I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. This is a true story. Oh, by the way, I once thought that the best way to prepare for retirement would be to make a film of every family trying to get out the door in the morning with their children. I thought it would be hilarious. It would get me a definite Academy Award because it's so hilarious. But this one family was telling me that both parents had to work. One kid went to a lower school, one kid went to a different campus for a preschool, and there was a third kid that went to a middle school on yet another campus. One parent dropped the other off at BART. They all got in the van. One parent dropped the other off at BART, and that other one that was driving took all the kids to their campus, and they had to all get to work on time. So the morning was a zoo, just trying to get everybody out the door. And they were saying that often it would happen that they would finally get everybody out the door in the car, ready to go. And the 4-year-old would say, but I wanted to be the one that opened the door. So the parents would get out of the car, get the rest of the kids out of the car, back into the house so the 4-year-old could open the door. And I said to them, do you imagine anyone else, anywhere else in their lives would do that? That this poor kid is operating at preschool and in the world, thinking that if they have a feeling, 4 other people are going to contour themselves to that one kid's feeling. The world doesn't work like that. And actually, completely understandable is that that little guy was disappointed. That's so understandable. That kid had an image of how he wanted the morning to go. It didn't go like that. But whether or not we all organize ourselves around someone's disappointed feeling is another question. So what I'm talking about is how we manage our everyday life. When there's a setback or a conflict, how we manage that sets our kids up to be ready to how to deal with the rest of the world. So one really big important way that we support our kids' development is to not overstay our welcome in a role that they may have outgrown the need for. If they can do something themselves, it's time for them to do it themselves. We as parents have a hard time letting go of that. I think sometimes we're so busy and on automatic, we don't notice the kid can do it themselves. Other times the kid gives a little pushback and we cave to avoid conflict. But it's really important to not overstay and to give kids some agency where they're ready. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to give you in 2 minutes my world's shortest view of parents' role with kids, which is that the bottom line is it's a kid's job to dump their parents. That's the truth. That you go from being an immediate supervisor, hovering over and watching every little thing they do so they don't hurt themselves, to kind of a middle manager where you give them some room, but you oversee the scene, to a CEO where you even let them manage their little departments, but you make sure everything is happening. And if you're very, very lucky, you end up with a seat on the advisory board. That is the prize to keep your eye on. Because you know why? Because that is a tenured position. It's lifelong. All the other positions eventually end, but this is the one you're looking for. And one of the best ways to assure a role on your kid's advisory board down the line is for you to show the kind of confidence in them that you want them to have in themselves. So that means you send them out to school today and out into the world in the years to come with confidence that they can manage, that things will go well. If they don't go well, that your kid has the resilience to manage that, that if something goes sideways, that they're agile enough to cope with that, that whatever the setting is with their peers, with life in general, that they can manage that. So in order to get them in a place where you have confidence in their confidence, that means running your household in a way that reflects what they're going to have to do out in the world out there. So one of the things that gets in the way of that is that we get so concerned that our kids might be stressed somehow, that stress will harm them. And I want to tell you that actually the opposite is true. Not all stress is bad. And as a matter of fact, neuroscience is established that a certain amount of short-term stress not only isn't bad, but it's desirable because it grows brain cells. So stress is kind of like cholesterol. You know, there's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. Well, there's good stress and bad stress. Bad stress is the kind where it's ongoing, it's unresolved, and kids are struggling with it. Good stress is short-term, and a caring adult comes in and intervenes and supports the kid. Having experiences like that, where either the adult comes in or it just resolves itself fairly quickly, that is desirable. And it's desirable neurologically because it grows brain cells, but it's also desirable emotionally because it helps kids develop their disappointment muscles. Something isn't going well, they could stand their feelings, they can get through it. Now, the research I just told you is substantiated. You can find that in the literature. What I'm about to say, you can't find in literature, but Valentina was too kind to not mention how long I've been doing this, but I've been doing this work enough decades to tell you that what I'm about to say, even though I can't prove it, is true. I believe all children are born with a disappointment muscle, and it's a matter of exercising it so it has the strength to be used. So when you're walking down the street and it's close to dinner time and you're about to pass a bakery and you know your kid's going to ask for a cookie, and instead of letting them ask and saying no, you cross the street so that they won't have to see the bakery and you won't have to say no, you just missed a chance to strengthen their disappointment muscle. When you play games with your kids and you don't let them lose when they naturally would have lost, you're not only in that case missing a chance to develop their disappointment muscle, you're also giving them a message I think you don't mean to give, which is that it's a catastrophe to lose a game. And if it weren't a catastrophe, why would you go through all that trouble to arrange that they never lose? What you want kids to know is that's what makes a game a game. You win some, you lose some, not a big deal. Kids need to have that experience at home with the people who love them the most, so that they don't end up having to learn that from other kids before they're all the way secure and comfortable with those kids. They're secure and comfortable with you. So it's good to learn that from you. Also, you want to be sure that some of the things that they're going to have to do in school are things you do at home. For example, you want to promote certain kinds of social skills that also at your school, since social skills and classroom skills are almost the same exact thing at La Scuola, you want to promote skills like collaboration, cooperation, compassion. You want to be sure that those are happening at home, because if a kid can cooperate with you, they can engage the cooperation of other people. If they can collaborate with you, then they have the capacity to ask for help. It takes confidence to ask for help. And you have to have confidence in the capacity to be collaborative, to see collaborative as this, that asking for help is a sideways thing, not an up and down thing. You also want to be able to have compassion for others. And if kids aren't showing compassion, you want to stop and say, wait a minute, you knocked their Legos down. You interrupted something your brother was telling us. That hurt his feelings. That made him feel unimportant or like you weren't listening. I want you to care about that. Because if kids learn to have compassion for others, then they can have it for themselves. And they can remember to also treat themselves like they matter. You want your kids to treat themselves like they matter. And they can't do that if they're not treating others like they matter too. So let me just ask something, does the way your kids participate or not in collaborative efforts at home, like cleaning up, pitching in, carrying groceries from the car, keeping their own stuff out of the way? Like the way your kids act about that stuff at home, is that a way that would make them a desirable playmate, a desirable guest at someone else's house, a classmate or a team member, or eventually a roommate? Are those things at home happening? Would you be happy to have someone in your home behaving that way? That's a really important question to ask yourself. So the other thing I want to talk about is the two-way street of self-esteem. A lot of people think that kids having self-esteem is that they have regard for themselves, and that's part of it. You want to have regard for yourself, but you know, that isn't the whole picture. True self-esteem means having regard for yourself and the other person or others simultaneously. Anyone can be self-regarding and only consider themselves. Anyone can put themselves aside and just show up for whatever the other person needs. But to have regard for yourself and other and hold those both in your interactions, that is true self-esteem. And kids need to know, in order to get there, kids need to know two things. One, to have the self-regard, they need to know that they are special and important, and there's no one else like them. They are unique. And they also, the second thing they need to know is they're just like everybody else. And the art of parenting is knowing when to give which message. This is the moment to tell you that, wow, this drawing is special. I've never seen anything like it. This is the moment to say, I know that was upsetting. We all have days like that. So when you're setting limits with kids, one of the things you're doing is supporting the just like everybody else thing. So kids often feel singled out or called out when you set a limit, like, oh, I'm the bad one, there's something wrong with me. It's your job to say, no, actually, everyone needs to wait their turn. Everyone needs to consider someone else. Everyone has to get with the program. We're all going out now, so we're all going. No one gets to disrupt others in our class, in our family, at our dinner table. Everyone needs healthy routines like bedtimes and meal times. Everyone needs balance between learning and playing and chores and screens and exercise. I'm not picking on you. Everyone needs this. And yes, I am going to stop you when you're rude, because everyone needs to be respectful to each other. Everybody needs to express their feelings in ways that are in bounds. You're special and unique. It's your feeling. It's your own feeling. But we all have to behave in a way that's in bounds and respectful of others. We all have to listen to the people in charge of our well-being, whether it's a teacher or a parent. We all have to listen to whoever's in charge. When grown-ups go to work, they have to listen to their boss that's in charge of the well-being of their organization. And all of this is the message to your kid, that you are not being called out because you're wrong or bad. I'm bringing this to your attention because you need to be just like everybody else in this way. And the other thing about limits, which I want to say, is having clear limits and being able to experience the impact of their actions is empowering for kids. If you don't do that, or if you do it inconsistently, or by whim, it makes them feel like victims. Trust me, the last thing you want your kids to feel like are victims. Which brings me to when there's social interactions between kids. A lot of parents think of their children as having been victimized by some bully kid or some kid that does something. And I always have schools calling and saying, oh, I'm so concerned because these parents think this kid's a bully and is bullying their kid. And I say, I'm sorry, I feel bad for that kid, that people think that kid's a bully, but I'm more concerned about the kid who has a parent that thinks of them as a victim. That's going to be a harder thing to change in life. You want a kid to understand that there's behaviors that come their way that they don't like, and what can they do with that? You want to empower your kids. However, when you have a kid that messes up, forget about punishment. Forget about consequences, which is a fancy word for punishment. What you want to do are results that make sense to the kid. If you are disruptive, you're asked to be respectful, or you're asked to take some time somewhere else to get a reset. That's the result. And it's also the way the world works. If you're playing on a pro team and you're out of bounds or you're disruptive, you're asked to leave the game until you can get it together and come back and participate. That's just how the world works. That's just what we do. So then parents say to me, whoa, are you telling me if we can't have consequences and punishment that we can't have time out? No, actually, I'm saying that time out isn't for doing time. It's for getting a reset. Parents will say, I don't know where my kid should be for a timeout. I say, what about their room? Oh, there's books and toys in there. And I say, well, they're not doing time. You're trying to get them away from the situation where the trouble was and have them get a reset. They don't have to suffer. They just have to understand that it disrupts your activity when you get out of bounds. So think about resets. And when your kid does something out of bounds that is hurtful or disruptive to another kid or many kids, help them make it right. There are very few things in life that are more empowering than knowing that if you mess up, you can make it right. If you write the wrong letter, you can erase it. If you hurt somebody, bump into them and hurt them, or even lose your temper and hit them, you can apologize, you can get them some ice, you can make it right. And it's a really important thing for kids to know that. And it's important for them to also feel that that there is restoration in life, and to have trust in restoration, that you can come back. I mean, that is the basis of all kinds of resilience. The other thing is that the kids will say, well, that person's mad at me. I can't make it right. That person's mad at me. I said, that's right. That kid has a feeling, and a feeling is just a feeling. It's not an event. It's not permanent. It's a feeling. Just like disappointment is a feeling. It's not an event. So many times we parents think our kids' feeling of disappointment is an event we have to organize around. And as a matter of fact, we dread it so much that we rearrange things so they don't get disappointed, or we get what we know we can't. Like, let's say you have a kid who has trouble with separation and you're bringing them to preschool or kindergarten, and they just have a hard time with separating, and the whole ride over, you're dreading them having that feeling and being upset. remember that your kids think their parents are rational. So they imagine if you're so tense that you must also worry about being separated and about leaving them at school. And you must think this is a bad thing. Otherwise, why would you be so tense? So really helping, being ready to say, my kid might have a feeling about that, and that's okay, because a feeling's just a feeling. And so as long as I'm talking a little bit about disappointment again, I also want to talk about entitlement, because there are a lot of people talking about entitlement these days and how terrible privilege and entitlement and all this is. And I want to tell you that, like stress, I think of entitlement as also being like cholesterol. There's good entitlement and there's bad entitlement. So I'm not down on your kids having entitlement. I want them to feel entitled to be respected. I want them to feel entitled to be regarded. I want them to feel entitled to have a turn that everybody else has, to have a vote. Those are good entitlements. Bad entitlement is I always get to be first at the drinking fountain at everybody else's expense. Oh, I think we have a, okay, thank you. So you want to have a chance for good entitlement, because that's part of what it takes to feel confident and to have regard for yourself. But bad entitlement isn't giving you a chance to develop regard for other people. So the other thing I want to say, I want to talk a little about partnering with school, because when home and school are so different, the expectations are so very different in both settings, it is so hard on kids. And I try to talk to parents about this. I say, you don't want your kids going to school with no experience with, say, how to do their own, zip their own zippers, open their own lunchbox. They should learn those kinds of things, those of you with little kids. As your kids get older, things are going to be asked of them in school that you want them to do at home. Keep track of their stuff. Be responsive and respectful when they don't like what a grown-up says. All of these things are something you want them to have experience with at home, so it's not shocking and a big temperature change when they go to school. And you want to keep communication open with school. I mean, you are at a school that just loves this, thrives on this, is designed to involve parents in supporting kids' development. So you, parents, are the experts on your kids. You grew them, so you know them better than anybody. Their teachers are experts on that stage of development. You've had one or two or three or four kids of the same age. They've had dozens and dozens and dozens of kids of the same age. While we don't compare kids specifically, we do look to say, is this in range? Do second graders tend to struggle with this? Can you depend on a fourth grader being able to do this? Is this unusual or out of range? Whether it's academically, socially, emotionally, you want that feedback from teachers. And I'll tell you something that I tell every group of parents, that teachers' observations are gold. When your kid's teacher tells you, I have this concern about your kid that she doesn't seem as engaged as I would expect her to be. Ask them to tell you a story. Can you give me an example? Can you share an observation? They readily have those for you because they're with your kids day in and day out. And those observations are gold, because you don't know what your kid is like in the world outside of home. That, I remember being at a teacher conference in kindergarten with one of my kids, where the teacher was saying something that was just shocking to us. Couldn't believe it. They said she takes the initiative for cleaning up. She organizes all her things. She helps the other kids clean up. Do you know whose parents we are? We couldn't believe they were talking about our kid. We were the last to know that she was capable of those things. She was the youngest, and they gave examples. And that was pretty special to hear that. So the thing that you have to remember is you are never with your kids when they are without their parents. Some people like to argue with me about that. They tell me that they snoop on their kids, they stand at the edge of the playground, they look in the windows. But I always tell parents, your kids can smell that you're there, and they behave differently around their own parents than when they're out in the world. You want to know who your kid is in the world, and you want the teachers to know who your kid is at home, so that together as a team, you're working with the whole child. You're sharing what you see and know, because that collaboration is essential. The parents need teachers' perspective to see who their kid is in the world, and teachers need your perspective on who this kid is that they might not be seeing. So I also want to talk a little about communication, because it's not just what we say to our kids, but how we say things. And I want you to think about this. If your child were to treat a teacher, a grandparent, a neighbor, the clerk at the grocery store, the way they talk to you when they're upset, would that be okay with you? Would you approve of that? Would it fit with your values? Would it land okay with those other adults? Would they consider your kid to be respectful? That's a really important question that I ask parents all the time. They'll talk to me about how their kid responded to them, and I say, I usually use teachers. I'll say, would you be okay with your kid talking to a teacher? Oh, my child would never talk to a teacher that way. Sooner or later, your child will talk to other people, to other adults that way, because they think you're rational and this is an acceptable way to talk to somebody. So I really want you to reflect on how your kids say things, no matter how valid their complaint or protest or expression of a feeling is. It's not just what they have to say, but how they say it. And I want to say that by and large, in terms of our communication to kids, I find that loving, caring parents, most of the communication they give to their kids is caring, good, important, supportive things to say. Where the trouble happens is with the stuff we didn't intend to say, the messages we didn't intend to give. So the examples, let me give you some examples. You tell your kid that it's bedtime. It's time to go to bed. It's lights off. This is it. Time to go to bed. You put the kid in bed. They call out to you, I'm thirsty, I need some water, I can't sleep. Okay, I'll get you some water. That's it. Now you go to sleep. Now I have to go to the bathroom and I'm afraid it's dark. It's not dark. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Okay, I'll go with you to the bathroom. You get them to the bathroom. Then you go out and say, but this is it. Now this is it. You had water, you peed, this is it. But you didn't hug me, you didn't hug me. Then you have to go back in and you hug them. Then they call again, Mom, and George, I've had it, you go in there. Dad goes in, the kid goes, oh, that was interesting. First I got Mom to do this and this, now here's Dad, what's Dad gonna do? And you think you're coming to see me and tell me that we have trouble with bedtime. I'm telling you that your kids are running the late show. They're having bedtime entertainment. You are so entertaining. If you have trouble getting your kids to bed at night, you need to get more boring. You need to be so boring. You do the same boring routine every night, so they just assume go to sleep, because that's more interesting than dealing with you. But if you're going to offer this variety of every night a different response, that's the other thing. Parents come to me having trouble about setting limits about something. They say, we tried everything. And I said, there's the problem. When you keep switching what you do, it's so entertaining. It keeps the kids engaged. So those parents think they're telling their kid to go to bed, but instead they're saying there's a lot of entertainment to be had if you just stay up for it. Another example is your kid says, I want more milk. And while you're pouring it, you say, you need to ask me nicely when you want something. The message to your kid is, if I ask rudely, I get a little lecture with my pour, but I still get a pour. If your kid asks rudely, it shouldn't be effective. You wait to do the
Can I
pour
help you?
until you get a response that is acceptable to you as a way to ask. So here's some more unintentional messages. A kid comes home, this literally happened. A fourth grader came home, told her parents that the teacher on a paper she wrote had circled a word as misspelled, but it wasn't misspelled. It was actually spelled correctly. And the
Dice que en el boletín lo van a mandar también.
parents looked at it and looked it up and found that she was right. It was spelled correctly. So the mom, who was an attorney, wrote a 3-page brief explaining to the teacher that this word really was correct and her kid shouldn't have been marked down because her kid got a 99 instead of 100, which was very upsetting, and the kid was disappointed and the mom didn't want the kid to be disappointed. And so sent this whole big thing with the kid to the school. So first of all, the parent gave the kid the message, mistakes are a big deal. That's not going to help a kid with their confidence. It's okay to make mistakes. This message was the teacher's mistake wasn't okay to make. Second, I have no confidence in you that you can just go talk to your teacher and ask about it. And the question is, does it matter anyway? So all of those messages, the kid got a distortion of something the parent hadn't thought through. When we accommodate a kid to ward off a tantrum, we're saying that I agree that it's crucial that you get things on your terms. You don't mean that. You just mean, I don't want our whole night ruined or the whole car ride to be a drag. But your kid thinks it's a terrible thing if I don't get my way, because that's the message they get. So you need to be careful about that. Also, using threats to manage your kids. If you don't do this, then that. If you don't do this, then that. Completely understandable that you're reaching for some leverage. Sometimes, no matter what we do, we can't seem to inspire our kids to cooperate. So we grasp for leverage. But when you use threats, if them, you foster in your kids either a tendency to want to be a threatening person themselves to get leverage, or to be somebody that's been trained to respond to threats. I had a little girl in my practice who, she was in first grade, and a kid she'd known since they were very little. She said to me that that kid would not let her play with anybody else. And I said, what do you mean she won't let you? Well, she said that if I play with anybody else, she'll tell. And I say, honey, who's she going to tell? She's going to tell my teacher. I said, what do you think your teacher would do if this kid said she won't play with me? she wants to play with someone else. The kid thought for a minute and said, I think my teacher would tell her to find someone else to play with them. And I said, so why is it a big deal if she threatens to tell your teacher? And the kid looked at me and said, I don't know why it's a big deal. She'd been held hostage all this time without wondering, why is that a big deal? So I said, I think I know why it's a big deal, and glared at the dad. The dad asked if I was glaring at him. I said I was. He said, why? And I said, because we've talked about you using threats. And now you see that your kid has been trained to respond just automatically to people's threats. So you're probably going to say, oh my goodness, I do that if you don't do your homework, you can't have screen time. If you don't clean up or not going to your friend's house, if you don't hurry up and brush your teeth, we won't have a story tonight. If then. What are you going to do about that? I'm not going to take your leverage away. I'm just going to suggest that instead of if then, you say when then. When you've brushed your teeth and gotten your PJs on, we can have a story when there's still time. When all your homework's done, you can get some extra screen time. I didn't get extra screen time. Your homework wasn't done before bedtime. You don't have to threaten. All you have to do is tell kids how the world works. When this, then that. Business before pleasure. Sequencing. We do this first, then this second. That's how it works. Also, I want to say that you want to be sure that you don't feel compelled to do something about every feeling your kid has. One thing that's wonderful for me, and it's particularly true at your school, teachers are just so warm that when a kid has a big feeling, the teacher is like, oh, but they don't rearrange life because the kid has a feeling about something. So there is warmth, there is caring, there is empathy, there's compassion that you have a feeling, because a feeling, while it's not an event, it just is. We can't tell a kid not to have a feeling. They have a feeling. So you have some warmth for the feeling, but you don't have to do something about most of the feelings your kids have. So most of the time I encourage parents when their kids come to them with feelings or big declarations to just say, oh, say, I wanted this and instead that happened. Oh, you don't have to fix it. You don't have to do something about it. And also when there's a disappointment, a very straightforward disappointment, you want to be able to say to the kids, oh, well, maybe tomorrow she'll play with you. Oh, well, maybe you'll get a turn to do that next time. Oh, well. I also want to say that here's a question too about when your kids have a big feeling and they get reactive to something and it frustrates and gets you upset because they hit or they throw or they demand or something. Do you express your anger and impatience in a way that you'd want them to expect from other people? When they're upset. So for example, if we often lose our patience with our kids and treat them in a way that we wouldn't want anyone else treating our kid, or we wouldn't want our kid to tolerate someone treating them that way, but we treat them that way. We're giving our kids messages that it's acceptable to be called names. It's acceptable to be told you're worthless, whatever. It's acceptable to make them feel small. And we really have to ask ourselves, if someone else were talking to my kid that way, would that be okay? And you'll say to me, well, no, they don't love them. They're not their mommy, daddy. But your kid is thinking that when someone's important to me and I'm important to them, I get to talk to them that way and they get to talk to me this way. I want you just to ask yourself, because we're telling our kids what we don't want to put up with, but we're doing it in a way that tells them how they do and don't deserve to be treated when someone's trying to set a limit with them. It's an unintended message that has a powerful impact, and probably everybody listening to this can think of a time in their lives where they accepted something or got involved in a dynamic where they had to have a wake-up call. Wait, this isn't right. Why did I accept that in the first place? So the other thing is, at home with siblings, when you listen to them have a squabble or they have a difficult moment between them, the way one kid talks to another, the way the other kid responds to the other, would you object to your kid talking to a classmate or a playmate that way? Would you object to a kid talking to your kid that way? If that is not a way you want your kid to be in the world, don't let it happen at home. And I know this isn't really easy, but it's such an important thing to help your kids know how to behave in the world or to do with what happens, because you need to believe in your kids' capacity to be effective, but you also need to give them the tools that they need to be effective in that way. So I think the most important thing I want to say is that there's a lot of goodness in the world, and helping your kids look for that goodness, that they tell you a bad thing happened. I want to tell you a real quick story. A kindergarten teacher told me the following story. A parent came into the classroom really upset with the teacher because her kid, when she picked him up the day before, was crying and said that it was a rainy day and they usually go to sports after lunch, but it was raining and the kid knew not to go to sports because it was raining, but didn't know where to go and got upset and cried. And what kind of school is this where you don't prepare kids for that? And that kid had to go through that terrible traumatic experience and was very upset. The teacher actually called me and said, I had a parent that just was so mad at me and very upset about something, and it's just confusing to me. I don't know if I did something wrong. So I asked the teacher what happened. She said, well, it was lunch and it did start to rain and it was the end of lunch. And this kid didn't know where to go because it was raining and sports wasn't going to happen, and started to cry. He is a kindergartner. A second grader came over and asked what was the matter. And the kid said that he didn't know where to go. And the second grader said, come on, and brought him to the teacher on yard duty. The teacher asked what happened. The kid explained. The teacher said, oh, when it rains, you go back to your class. Come on, I'll take you. So the teacher took the kid back to the class, and the teacher explained, I'm sorry, you got confused. And in 2 seconds, the kid was fine and playing. The end of the school day, the kid got in the car and the mom said, how was school today? The kid said, fine. What did you do? Nothing. Well, what happened today? Nothing. Nothing happened? What kind of day is that? Of course something happened. What happened? No, not anything. Oh, I want to hear about your day. What happened? So finally the kid said, well, I cried. You cried? You cried? Why did you cry? Well, I didn't know where to go. You didn't know where to go? What do you mean? And then he said, well, it was lunch and I didn't know where to go. And she got all upset and went in to talk to the teacher the next day. So the sad thing is, this is what we call interviewing for pain, looking for something and then pouncing on the something you found. What's sad is that kid got, wow, my mom really needs to hear about my hard times, so I better be looking for hard times so I have something to report. What the mom missed an opportunity to do is to say, isn't that you had a feeling, you were a little worried for a while there, but isn't it wonderful that that other kid found you and helped you? That the teacher on the yard helped you, that your teacher explained to you? Isn't the world a nice place with all these great people? And then you have a kid who walks around thinking, yeah, hard things might happen, but then they work out. And that grows good brain cells. So the other thing I want to leave you with in my talk tonight is a lot of parents listen to some of these things and say, oh no, I did if then. Oh no, I had a late show at night. Oh no, I don't just say, oh, I make a big deal out of feelings. Oh no, my kid has a hard time with disappointment. And what I say to you is it's never too late. It's never, ever too late to work on these issues, to support your kids, to build these capacities, to have the kind of relationship with them where they want to talk to you, where they want to be open with you, to have the kind of relationship that over time, if you're very lucky and end up on the advisory board, that you find that they want you in their lives and they want to be in your life because they like the way things go between you. So that's what I leave you with.